You're watching Your Daily Snapshot, and this is our video on America, the Geopolitics of the United States, Part 1, The Inevitable Empire. Like nearly all the peoples of North and South America, most Americans are not originally from the territory that became the United States. They are a diverse collection of peoples primarily from different Western European states, mixed in with smaller groups from 100 more. All of the New World entities struggled to carve a modern nation and state out of the American continents. Brazil is an excellent case of what and how that struggle can be a difficult one. I meant to say how. This is my second video on YouTube. The United States falls on the opposite end of the spectrum to Brazil. The American geography is an impressive one. The Great Mississippi Basin, together with the Intercoastal Waterway, has more kilometers of navigable internal waterways than the rest of the world combined. The American Midwest is both overlaid by this waterway and is the world's largest continuous piece of farmland. The US Atlantic coast possesses more major ports than the rest of the Western Hemisphere combined. Two vast oceans insulate the United States from Asian and European powers. This creates, much separation between potential rivals to the United States' hegemony. On the other hand, if we look towards Mexico, we have vast deserts that separate the United States from Mexico to the south, while lakes and forests separate the population centers in Canada from those in the United States. The United States has capital, food, surpluses, and physical insulation in excess of every other country in the world by an exceedingly large margin. So like the Turks, the Americans are not important because of who they are, but because of where they live. The American core. North America is a triangle-shaped continent centered in the temperate portions of the Northern Hemisphere. It is of significant size that its northern reaches are fully Arctic and its southern reaches are fully tropical. Predominant wind currents carry moisture from the west to the east across the continent. When we look at the climate, we see a consistent series of wide north-south precipitation bands, largely shaped by the land masses, longitude, typography. In another video, we'll talk about the importance of topography and contrast the United States to the American continents to the African continents, and how topography matters when it comes to geopolitics. The Rocky Mountains dominate the western third of the northern and central parts of North America, generating a rain shadow effect just east of the mountain range, an area known colloquially as the Great Plains. Further east of this semi-arid region are the well-watered plains of the prairie provinces of Canada and the American Midwest. This zone comprises both the most productive and the largest continuous acreage of arable land on the planet. Now that's really something, isn't it? East of this premium zone of arable land lies a second mountain chain known as the Appalachians. Forgive me if I'm butchering this pronunciation. While this chain is far lower and thinner than the Rockies, it still constitutes a notable barrier to movement and economic development. However, the lower elevation of the mountains combined with the wide coastal plain of the East Coast does not result in the rain shadow effect of the Great Plains. Consequently, the eastern plain of the East Coast is well-watered throughout. In the continent's northern and southern reaches, this longitudinal pattern is not quite so clear-cut. North of the Great Lakes region lies the Canadian Shield, an area where repeated glaciarization has scraped off most of the top soil. That combined with the area's colder climate means that these lands are not nearly as productive as regions further south or west, and as such largely remain unpopulated to the modern day. In the south, Mexico, the North American landmass narrows drastically from more than 5,000 kilometers or 3,100 miles wide to at most 2,000 kilometers, and in locations less than 1,000 kilometers, and in most locations less than 1,000 kilometers. Forgive me for that. The Mexican extension also occurs in the Rocky Mountains and the Great Plains longitudinal zone, generating a wide, dry, irregular uplift that lacks the agricultural promise of the Canadian prairie provinces or the American Midwest. The continent's final geographic piece is its sort of variant width, if that makes sense, known as Central America. That is too wet and rugged to develop into anything more than a series of isolated city-states, much less a single country that would have had an impact on continental affairs. Due to a series of swamps and mountains where the two American continents join, there is still no road network linking them, and the two Americas only indirectly affect each other's development. The most distinctive and important feature of North America is the river network in the middle third of the continent. While its components are larger both in volume and length than most of the world's rivers, this is not what sets the network apart. Very few of its tributaries begin at higher elevations, making vast tracts of these rivers easily navigable. In the case of Mississippi, the head of navigation just north of Minneapolis, is 3,000 kilometers inland. The network consists of 6 distinct river systems: the Massachusetts, Auckland's, Red, Ohio, Tennessee, and of course Mississippi. The unified nature of this system greatly enhances the region's usefulness and potential economic and political power. First, shipping goods via water is a magnitude cheaper than shipping them via land. This ties into a very interesting geopolitical situation happening currently in Turkey. Not to get too off traffic, but Turkey is currently building a canal that would allow them to connect their two waterways up and potentially make Istanbul into an island. But that's getting a bit off topic. We can cover that in another video. The specific ratio varies greatly based on technological error and local typography, but in the Petrolian age in the United States, the cost of transport via water is roughly 10 to 30 times cheaper than over land. This simple fact makes countries with robust maritime transport options extremely capital rich when compared to countries limited only to land-based options. This factor is the primary reason why major economic powers of the past half millennium have been Japan, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Second, the watershed of the Great Mississippi Basin largely overlays North America's arable lands. Normally, agricultural areas as large as the American Midwest are underutilized, as the cost of shipping their output to more densely populated regions cuts deeply into the economics of agriculture. The Eurasian steppe is an excellent example. Even in modern times, Russian crops occasionally rot before they can reach market. Massive artificial transport networks must be constructed and maintained in order for land to reach its full potential. Not so much in the case of the greater Mississippi Basin. The vast bulk of the prime agricultural land are within 200 kilometers of a stretch of navigable river. Road and rail are still used for collection, but not nearly as omnipresent as river ports, which allow for the entirety of the basin's farmers to easily and cheaply, most of all, ship their products to markets, not just in North America, but all over the world. Third, the river network's unity greatly eases the issue of political integration. All of the people of the basin are from the same economic system, ensuring constant contact and common interests. Regional proclivities obviously still arise, but this is not Northern Europe, where a variety of separate river systems have given rise to multiple national identities. It is worth briefly explaining why we're talking so much about rivers here as opposed to coastline. First, navigable rivers by definition serve twice the land area of a coastline. Rivers have 2 banks, coasts only have 1. Second, rivers are not subject to tidal forces, greatly easing the construction and maintenance of supporting infrastructure. Third, storm surges often accompany oceanic stores, which force the evacuation of oceanic ports. None of this eliminates the usefulness per se of coastal ports, but in terms of capacity to generate capital, coastal regions are a poor second compared to lands with navigable rivers. This is why we are seeing projects in Eastern Europe, where we have countries like Serbia going to China to get loans to actually begin to link up river systems within Europe, potentially creating a massive trade network. But again, we can cover that in another video. There are 3 features, all maritime in nature, that further leverages the raw power of the greater Mississippi Basin with the raw power that this basin provides. First are the severe indentations of the North American coastline, granting the region a wealth of sheltered bays and natural deep water ports. The most obvious example of this includes the Gulf of St. Lawrence, San Francisco Bay, Chesapeake Bay, Galveston Bay, and Long Island Sound and New York Bay. Second, there are Great Lakes. Unlike the Mississippi Basin, the Great Lakes are not naturally navigable due to winter freezes and obstacles like Niagara Falls. However, over the past 200 years, extensive hydrological engineering has been completed, mostly by Canada, to allow for full navigation on the lakes. Since the 1960s, penetrating halfway through the continent, the Great Lakes have provided a secondary water transport system that has opened up even more lands for productive use and provided an even greater capacity for North America capital generation. The benefits of this system are reaped mainly by the warmer lands of the United States rather than the colder lands of Canada. But since the Great Lakes constitute Canada's only maritime transport option for reaching the interior, most of the engineering was paid for by Canadians rather than Americans. Third, and most important, are the lines of barrier islands that parallel the continent's eastern Gulf coasts. These islands allow riverine Mississippi traffic to travel in a protected intercoastal waterway all the way south to Rio Grande, and all the way north to Chesapeake Bay. In addition to servicing as a sort of oceanic river, the island's train's proximity to the Mississippi Delta creates an extension of sorts for all Mississippi shipping, in essence extending the political and economic unifying tendencies of the Mississippi Basin to the eastern coastal plain. Thus, the greater Mississippi Basin is the continent's core, and whoever controls that core is not only current to dominate the East Coast and the Great Lake region, but will also have the agricultural, transport, trade, and political unification capacity to be a world power, even, and this is the most important point of this sort of geopolitical summary, even without having to interact with the rest of the global system. There is of course more to North America than simply this core region and its immediate satellites. There are many secondary stretches of agricultural land as well, those just north of the Great Mississippi Basin in South Central Canada, the lands just north of Lake Erie and Lake Ontario, the Atlantic coastal plain that wraps around the southern terminus of the Appalachians, California's Central Valley, and the coastal plain of the Pacific Northwest, just to name a few. But all of these regions when combined, are considerably smaller than the American Midwest, and are not ideal agriculturally as the Midwest is. Because the Great Lakes are not naturally navigable, costly canals must be constructed. The prairie provinces of South Central Canada lack a river transport system altogether. California's Central Valley requires irrigation. The Mexican highlands are semi-arid and lack any navigable rivers. And so we're going to continue this video in our part 2, and probably even go up to probably part 5. I have a lot to say on this sort of topic, but this has been part 1 of a geopolitical snapshot, you could say, into North America. If you've enjoyed this, make sure you go to part 2 of this video, which you can find on our channel, and you subscribe for more videos like this.